my name is Karle Roberts, and I'm the Family Engagement Coordinator here at Compass Charter Schools. I would like to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen to this recording. I would also like to thank our talented guest presenter, Mr. Jason B., who's taken the time out of his busy schedule to help. Today we are going to share with you some ideas and resources to help you help your scholars be better note takers. Before we begin, I'd like to take a quick second to remind you that at Compass Charter Schools we have 5 core values. They are achievement, respect, teamwork, integrity, and communication. These serve as our guiding principles for our scholars, learning coaches, and staff. Each month this year, we have been taking the time to focus on one of our core values, starting with achievement and working our way through to communication, as we know the importance of our core values and we want them to remain in the forefront of our minds. I'm so glad to have you joining with us as we continue to dig deeper into the role of the learning coach and the ways that you could help your scholar be a better note taker. Today, as I mentioned, we have the talented Jason B., who's one of our amazing high school social studies teachers, as well as our Compass AVID lead. Today, Mr. B will be covering, do scholars need to take notes? Which is better, pen and paper or computer? What are Cornell Notes and why do they work? What are other ways my scholar can take notes? And are there any other note-taking tools? We will also be providing a list of resources, including a download that can be found on our resource page, which will be in the description of this video on our YouTube channel. And now I will hand it off to Mr. B.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Roberts, and thank you to all the learning coaches and scholars who are joining us today via recording. I hope that you guys find this information very helpful, and please, at the end, if you have any other questions, please follow up with me through email or phone call. So, as Mrs. Roberts said, yes, my name is Jason B. I am the world history teacher here at Compass Charter Schools. I work on the online high school, and I do a lot of work with the teachers as far as the AVID implementation goes as well. As Ms. Roberts referred to, I have several guiding questions that I would like to use during today's presentation to help us understand why scholars need to take notes, why taking notes is important and helpful in achieving scholar success, as well as some tools and options that you have as far as taking notes. So to begin, I would like to kind of explore a little bit the underlying research that tells us why Cornell Notes and any kind of notes for that matter are effective. A lot of this research comes from the 1940s and 1950s through a psychologist by the name of Edgar Dale. He actually did a lot of research with his students in how memories are created and what is the most effective way in order to process memory to get the best recall from that memory or memory. So Mr. Dale created what he calls the cone of experience to help us visualize the findings of his research. And if you look at this cone, what you'll see is a typical hierarchy, and on top you have a very narrow point. This is represented by the least effective modes of input when it comes to learning new information. On the bottom, you have a very wide base. This is a foundational tool that students should be using in order to help with understanding and creation. What Dale's conclusions was if we focus on doing concrete, real activities alongside with acquiring new information, then we have a much higher likelihood at both understanding the information and being able to recall from memory those facts when needed, such as on quizzes and tests. If you look at the hierarchy for just one moment, you'll notice that when you're looking at isolated inputs such as just reading or just hearing, scholars will actually retain and understand very little of that information. 10% of what they read, scholars will remember. 20% of what they hear, scholars will remember. And as you move down that hierarchy, you'll see that the understanding and the actual activities associated with that learning gets much more sophisticated and much more concrete, with the most concrete at the bottom. And those activities being such things as presenting to a class, teaching to a class a certain topic, being involved in some kind of class debate or some kind of a class discussion. And what Dale had actually included, that the more concrete the experience that the student or the scholar is able to engage in, the higher levels the scholar will be motivated to actually learn, the higher levels of understanding of the information that they are experiencing and engaging in, and the higher levels of memory. And just if you can kind of conceptualize and put this into your own life for a moment, you might recall a time where one of your scholars may have had a class presentation or some type of a debate that they were doing. And you might recall that whenever those assignments came, those scholars were much more motivated. They wanted to do a good job. They wanted to make sure they understood those facts. Part because they wanted to have a good presentation and a good lesson for their peers, and part because they didn't want to seem as though they didn't understand what they were talking about. And just from a personal reflection, when I became a teacher and I started having to do this every day and teach to my scholars every day, that's when I really became a master of my course. And this is what I'm suggesting, and this is what the evidence from Edgar Dale's research is telling us. So with that said, the question then becomes, in a online platform or a options platform or distance learning type platform, how do we get scholars to engage? And I will suggest to you one of the easiest ways to get scholars to engage and to get this concrete level of experiences is by taking notes and engaging in notes. So that'll bring us to our next slide. And so when we start, so if the answer to the question is, do scholars need to take notes? That begs the question, well, how are we going to actually have the scholars take notes? Because we work at a school that is heavily influenced by the technology we use, and because of the student population that we work with and their interest in technology, then we're going to find that naturally scholars are going to want to gravitate to using technological modes when they're taking notes, which is fine. And there's a lot of good aspects to taking notes using technology. But also, I would suggest, and I want to point out a couple of factors to why we shouldn't discount pen and paper. So this slide, the whole purpose is, if we're going to take notes and we're going to encourage scholars to take notes, how are we going to actually facilitate that? Pen and paper or technology? Pen and paper has a couple of really good advantages. First of all, if you're a tactile learner like myself, I like to do things, I like to experience things, I like to engage in those demonstrations and be hands-on. The pen and paper note is really best suited for tactile learners. This gives them that spatial awareness. This allows them to write down the information, and many times our tactile learners will also be our visual learners as well. And many times when you write down that information, they can conceptualize where they read it or where they wrote it down, and then that will help them actually with the recall process. Also, and as we'll see with the Cornell Notes, if you take notes on pen and paper, then this actually allows for a higher level order of ideas, which basically means it forces students to think about the information that they're learning in a new and unique way. Many times this is through summary, reflection, creating essential questions or questions for their teachers. And we'll talk about how Cornell's in particular can help us with that. However, of course, there are some, quote unquote, bad reasons to not take pen and paper notes. The first of which I think I alluded to a second ago with our populations. One of the challenges I have as a teacher is being engaging enough to keep my scholars focus on what's going on in the classroom and not what's going on in YouTube or their video game or their phone, right? And many times, if we're not somehow engaging that technology and we're telling them just to use pen and paper, scholars will be resistant and they'll see that as antiquated or old-fashioned, something that they don't want to do. So that could be a hurdle, but hopefully we'll see that there are definitely many times the benefits outweigh the negatives. Also, another negative that I've heard a lot of times from my scholars is that it's less convenient, right? They don't know where pen and paper are. They have to carry this with them. Maybe if they're not home, they don't have their notes with them, right? And this is a legitimate concern, and it could be seen as a negative consequence to using pen and paper. Technology, right? This is what most of my scholars want to use. This is what my own children actually want to use, and they're 9 and 11. They want to use technology, and that is great, right? And we should be promoting the use of technology in any way we can. We all know we live in a world that's full of technology. We want to be pushing and educating our scholars in what's sometimes referred to as 21st century skills. And that is what I would say would be one of the best reasons to take notes using technology, is that it's just promoting those digital skills that we all know is going to be important in our children's lives in the future. The second really good thing about taking notes using technology is all the writing tools, right? I don't know where I'd be now without spell check. And those are good and bad, right? Sometimes that makes me a bit of a lazy writer, but I know that I would rather have the spell check, I'd rather have the grammar check, and any other one of the tools that are out there than to not have them. So these are all really great tools. We should use them. However, there is also a bad side to using technology as part of our note-taking system. And I say first and foremost, it's the level of distraction. I don't know about you guys, but whenever I'm working and I'm online, and it's very easy for me to get distracted. I might be curious about what's going on in CNN.com, or maybe one of my friends posted something, and before I know it, a half hour has slipped through my fingers that I can't get back. And it can be something that we have to focus on, minimizing those distractions. Many times that just involves turning off the pop-ups or the notifications if you get them automatically on your phone or your tablet. And sometimes it's just keeping your scholar or yourself accountable to staying away from those distractions. The last bad reason, and I think this is probably the most important, is that many times if you just take notes using technology and you're typing the notes, this is going to run the risk of creating a lazy scholar or creating an environment for lazy scholarship. And what I mean by that is imagine a scholar taking notes in class. What they typically do is they want to type and they want to write down every single thing that the teacher says. They almost want to make a transcript about what's going on in the class so they don't miss anything. Well, we all know this is impossible, especially if you're one of my students, and I can get quite excited about topics and I can start speaking rather quickly. And so the problem with that is they're going to have gaps in their notes, and if they're doing nothing but transcribing what's going on in the class, whether it's a class lecture, a video, maybe a demonstration, a presentation, they're going to miss information, and they're not really understanding what they're writing. They're just copying down. Using pen and paper, and especially, and we'll see in a moment how Cornell Notes will help us specifically do this, using pen and paper forces us to consolidate, to help us summarize and reflect upon what we're hearing and seeing in the class and put down in our own words, right? And these are those unique and novel situations I'm talking about, their own interpretation of what's going on in that lesson. This already, if you're engaged in this type of level of note taking, then you're already getting into that higher level of understanding, and you're already creating the modes of recall. That's going to be really important when that test comes and you want to remember those facts. So look, this is an extensive list, and I'm sure you guys all have goods and bads on each of these that you experience in your own life. However, for your consideration, these are the ones that I suggest. However, what you'll see here is I'm not saying only use pen and paper, and I'm not saying only use technology. What I am saying is there's good and bads on both of these, And really what we need to do, and I guess what you need to do as the learning coach, is you really need to maybe have a conversation with your scholar, maybe sit down and watch them take notes a couple of times and see how they're taking notes, and then see which system works best for you. So hopefully during today's presentation, I'll give you guys really good options for either route, pen or paper or technology, whichever one works the best for you. Okay, so moving on. Our next question has us actually look at the pen and paper route of note taking, and specifically look at the Cornell note taking system. So what are Cornell notes and how do they work? So Cornell notes aren't anything that's revolutionary. It's nothing that's very complex, but there is a definite system that we should follow when we're employing the Cornell note taking system. If you look at the picture that I have included on this slide, and right in the middle where you see the page of paper and the question mark, this is what a typical Cornell note sheet will look like. You'll see on the bottom there is a horizontal line that separates the bottom section that allows for students to present a summary. We'll talk about that in a moment. You'll see on the left there is a vertical line that creates a left-hand margin, and in this one, in the picture, it's the question mark, and I'll talk about what we do in that section in a moment. And then we see that the majority of the page just says notes. And really, this is the first start, or the first step rather, of the Cornell note-taking system. And this is just like what we've all experienced at some point in our educational careers, whether it was in high school or college or whatever. It's just that process of listening to what's going on in the lesson and writing down your notes, right? And that is basically step one, what the teacher is saying, and then what you are going, to write down. Many times scholars will, develop their own abbreviation systems. They'll, develop their own shorthand system. That's all great. And that, like I said, for part one, it's just the practice of recording the facts, the important dates, the people, anything that is of high relevance to what's currently being studied. That's step one. All right, easy enough. Step two is where we get students to actually, or scholars rather, to actually start engaging in those notes. And what step two has scholars do is reduce the information they wrote in that note section on their page into the most meaningful facts. So what is that key term? What is that specific date? What was the name of that treaty, right? Also, what scholars should put in this left-hand margin are other things. Perhaps there is a visual that they can jot down real quick that would help them remember what was going on in class, like that cone that we were referring to earlier. Also, what scholars can do in this section is they can write questions that they have for their teacher for the next class. So this is the first step in engaging with the notes. And this is where we start really taking that mode of understanding from a very superficial, just hearing and writing, to a more concrete level of interacting with the notes. So step three, this is what I ask my scholars to do usually a day, 2 days after the lesson's over. And that is just to take your notes out on your desk and to cover them up, to cover that main note section up with a piece of paper, a note card, even your hand, and try to recite, right? What we're doing is we're getting that rehearsal in. We're starting those early stages of taking this information from short-term memory to long-term memory. And that's where we want this to eventually be, right? That information that is well understood, well known by the scholar, and then easily retrievable when the time comes to apply it for a quiz, a test, essay, those kind of things. So it's just recite. You're not actually writing anything in this stage. It's just covering up and trying to recite. You want to do it a couple of days after the lesson's over to give the scholars time to kind of rehearse and to form those memories once again. Step 4. To me, this is one of the most important parts of the Cornell note-taking system. And this deals with that bottom, quarter of the page that you've written a line, the scholar's written a line, and this is designated for the summary or reflection sometimes it's referred to. And basically all we're asking a scholar to do in this section is reflect. You looked at your notes, you've identified key terms, significant dates, etc. Now what I want you to do, scholar, is take that information and summarize it in 2 or 3 sentences. Very short, concise. What was this lecture about? What was that lesson about? What's the main idea? This is going to take that information that scholar has learned, right, through listening or watching in a learning lab or a class and written it down. It's going to force them to take it to that next step and consolidate it on a higher level by putting it in their own words and reflect upon what's the most important aspects of that lecture. Many times, this is a really great tool for scholars to reflect on the class and what possible test questions might be on the upcoming exam. Many times I ask scholars to not only give me a summary, but give me an essay question or 2 that you think might come from this lesson. So again, you can see it's that interaction that's very important when scholars are taking Cornell notes. It's not just writing it down, not just hearing it and seeing it, writing it, but it's hearing it, seeing it, writing it, and then interpreting it, reflecting upon it, finding those important facts and pulling them out of there, putting it on the left margin. And then the last step is just the review. I ask my scholars to review the past week's lesson before the next week's lesson. So if I have my learning labs every Monday, I would ask them to review the prior week's learning lab the Monday before. And again, it just gives them one more chance to rehearse it. That rehearsal is going to, again, engage those neurons that facilitate memory and make it much easier for scholars to recall information when it's necessary. So a 5-step process. A lot of it is very, very familiar, especially that note-taking section, just what we all have done in the past. But it's really that left-hand margin, and then that bottom summary reflection, and then that engaging and going back into those notes and reading it and pulling information out, thinking about questions that could come from this content that makes this a concrete activity, leads to that rehearsal, and then eventually the recall and the student achievement that's going to follow. So that's Cornell Notes. On my next slide, I have a couple of templates that I'd like to share with everybody. And that I've actually shared with Ms. Roberts as well, that she'll add as an attachment to this presentation. On the left-hand side, it's just a blank Cornell Note template right from AVID. This is what I've shared with you. This is a fillable PDF file. So if you guys are electing to do this type of a note-taking system, which I really hope you do, you can do it on either pen and paper as well as using the technology, using this PDF. The middle slide is basically a summary of what I just explained. Again, that main section is just notes from the teacher. Left-hand margin are the main ideas, questions, vocabulary, reflection, etc., etc. And then that bottom part, that's that reflection, that's that summary. Put it in your own words. All the information from the entire page or that entire section, right? Put that in your own words, 2 or 3 sentences. It's quite difficult to do, but it's that thinking, right? It's that difficult thinking and forcing scholars to consolidate the information that leads them to that higher level processing of the information and, you know, that authentic interaction with the information. And then on the right, I just have a sample Cornell note that a scholar, it's like an 8th grade student, had completed. And this is just what a typical Cornell page would look like when it's completed. Okay, so let's say that we aren't going to use pen and paper and that we aren't necessarily a big fan of taking the Cornell notes. Are there any other ways that we can take notes? And the answer is yes, right? And I have submitted 3 options for everybody's review today. These are 3 that I use on a day-to-day basis. And I think that scholars who are more of our technologically mindset or the more digital, that comes more naturally to them, that these are options that those scholars can use. And so I'm referred to Google Docs, a program called Evernote, and then another program called OneNote. So Google Docs. This is something that I use every single day that I work. And I even have on my personal computer, I have my own Google Docs and Google Drive set up. So if you have a Gmail account, Google Docs is free. You have a Google Drive that comes along with your Gmail account. And when you access that Google Drive, and I shared a picture of mine here, this is my work Google Drive, you'll see that you can have access to not only a place to store all of your important files, but also you have access to 3 really important programs. You have access to Word, a word processing program, an Excel program, and also a PowerPoint program. So if anybody, maybe you don't have the current Microsoft Office, maybe you don't have access to those tools already, these are provided for you with a Gmail account. And I can tell you, I will even use the Google Docs in my learning labs. I find it a very efficient way to facilitate scholar collaboration during my learning labs, because these docs have a great option, and that's the share option. And what I'll do in my classes is I will, for example, I will get a scholar essay, and I will want my scholars in my class to grade that essay. So instead of like just putting it up there, as a slide that they can't interact with, my scholars can interact with, what I'll do is I'll make that essay, I'll turn it into a Google Doc, usually a Word doc, and then I'll share that with all of my scholars. That way they can each go into that doc, and they can go into there, they can edit, they can highlight, they can comment. And let's say that I'm teaching them how to write thesis statements, for example. And then I show them an essay that has a thesis. Well, by sharing that Google Doc and giving them access to that Google Doc, they can then go in there, they can highlight, they can collaborate, they can ask questions one another. And it's just a really fun way in order to get that collaboration that sometimes is a struggle for us to do in an online setting. I think Google Docs also is a great way to store your important files because it's on the cloud. You don't have to worry about having a USB drive or having your computer with you. It's always on the cloud, so you can always access it as long as you can access your Google or your Gmail accounts. So that is also a great feature of Google Docs. So that's the first one I want to go with you guys. I think that a lot of the teachers at CCS use it, so I would highly recommend everybody taking a look at your Google Drive account and what options are in there. The next technology that I would like to kind of introduce to everybody, if you haven't heard of this before, and point out a couple of the benefits, that's a program called Evernote. What Evernote actually is, it's a browser extension. So if you go to evernote.com and you download the browser extension, what you'll see, and it's kind of hard to see on the slide, but on the upper right of the slide that I shared with everybody, you'll see that there's a little icon of an elephant. The same elephant that is the icon for Evernote. So once you download it, that icon will pop up. And the great thing about Evernote, and this is what I especially encourage scholars to use whenever they're doing any research, is so let's say that I'm doing a research on the French Revolution, and that's what my screenshot that I've shared with you guys actually shows. And I'm on Google, and I just do some simple search for French Revolution, and then I come across just a million different resources on this topic, right? This happens a lot of times with my scholars. Excuse me. What tends to happen, at least what I found what tends to happen, is they get inundated with so much information that they get a little bit lost in it, and it gets a little overwhelming, and they might take some notes here and there, but they might lose that resource. The risk in losing a resource is a couple of risks, actually. First of all, if they didn't remember that resource for their citations for their teacher, well, then they could get a point deduction for not having the proper citations. Also, if they can't find that research again that they did on any browser like Google, for example, and they can't find it again, well, then they could get easily frustrated and discouraged. What Evernote does, whenever you find a web page, all you have to do is click that little icon of the elephant, and it'll automatically save that web page to your own personal Evernote account. And if you can look on the image that I showed everybody, you'll see that I have several that I added on the French Revolution. That's a topic that we're studying soon in my world history class. And all I did, I have many different options that I found when I was doing my research. I found some web pages, I found a couple of articles, I found a video, and every time I found one of these resources that I might want to use in my class, I just clicked that little elephant head icon, and it automatically saved that resource to my personal Evernote page. This is great when it comes to organizing research. It helps keep your research in one place. And then when scholars, a lot of times these research projects don't last one day, but, it takes multiple days to actually complete the project and, write the essay and write the presentation. It's just really nice to know that all the research will be in one place for your scholar when they need it. So Evernote, it's a really good web tool. The next one I like to kind of summarize a little bit and point out a couple of the features is one from Microsoft called OneNote. This is another program that is focused on organizing. It's a great tool for organizing notes. If you refer to the picture that I have included, you'll see on the left margin there are several tabs, 5 tabs that are already created. What does it say? Quick notes, meeting notes, to-do lists, etc., etc. And this, to me, is the beauty of using OneNote, because those categories can be personalized. And instead of saying quick notes, that could easily say world history. Instead of it saying meeting notes, that could easily say biology. And if your scholar is very prone to using technology for their research, for their note taking, for other academics, then OneNote serves as a very good way to keep all that information organized and again in one place to, for the ease of access. And also this is on the cloud. So once again, you don't need to worry about having a USB drive, having a computer, or losing something or leaving something at home, because it's on the cloud. It'll always be there. It's always able to be accessed. So OneNote, great tool for organizing, allows scholars to make folders for individual classes and to keep all that individual classwork together. Think of it like a virtual binder. So those are the 3 technologies that I would recommend if scholars are, really finding technology is the way that they want to, go through their classes to learn. They don't want to use pen and paper. Google Docs, OneNote, and Evernote, these are great tools to use. However, there is one other tool that I would like to introduce to everybody, and that is the idea of using graphic organizers. So I was thinking to myself, these tools are great, but what if we have, what do we have here for our visual learners? A lot of times, and especially a lot of the younger generation, it seems, I'm old and I'm biased, but it seems like they are always driven by what they're seeing, what their eyes are telling them. And that seems to be our overriding sense. If that's the case, well, then we can cater to that in the education world as well by using things like graphic organizers. I have 2 examples here. I have one that is just a Venn diagram that a scholar made using markers and looks like a poster board. You can tell that this scholar who made this is a visual learner because look at all the colors they use. This is a very visually appealing Venn diagram, much more visually appealing than the ones I usually have in my own history classes, I must say. If you have a scholar who is technology driven, then there's actually a website called Koogle, and that is COGGLE.IT. And that's kind of this mind map, or the kind of this spider web that you see next to the Venn diagram. This is great, a great way for scholars to use technology to get that visual representation of whatever they're learning. Venn diagrams, graphic organizers are great. They're a great way for scholars to take those big concepts that seem to be really overwhelming and really hard to handle, abstract in a lot of ways, and make these tangible and concrete and workable. For example, with the Koogle, the if you can see that's the main idea here, right, and that's right in the center of that web map is World War II as total war. This could very easily be an essay question that a scholar would have to write on. And there's so much information about World War II. A lot of times it's hard to discriminate what's important and applicable towards the task at hand, whether it's a quiz or an essay, and what is not. And that's why I think the beauty of graphic organizer, whether it's Google or a Venn diagram or any of the other ones that are out there, does. It helps scholars identify those relationships that we're looking for to apply the knowledge that's being learned in class to the task that the teacher or that the course is asking them to do. It's great at showing cause and effect. It's great at showing relationships between two seemingly unalike topics. And once again, like Cornell Notes, it helps to promote that higher level thinking and that consolidation that's going to help with the understanding, the recall, and then eventually the achievement. So Venn diagrams, graphic organizers, and then using technology, Google, these are other great ways to take notes, to consolidate what's being learned. And really the idea is just getting that experience, working with the information. Like any other skill that you're trying to learn, right, you need to get that practice. Many times in my classes, I compare to what we're doing in a classroom to what athletes do out on the football field or the basketball courts. It's silly to think that you're going to be able to go on the football field or basketball court and be a star player without any practice. Just like it's silly to think that you're going to become an A student without any practice, without any learning, any rehearsal, any studying, we call it, right? Studying. It's kind of the same thing. We just need to find new, unique ways to have scholars engage in information. I think any of these tools that I've outlined today does that job. But I think that a lot of times there is resistance, and we really have to hold them accountable and support and encourage and motivate them to use these tools and, to kind of take that extra effort, because really there's no shortcuts. There's no way that we're going to develop those skills in the classroom without the practice, just like there's no way that basketball player is going to develop the skill of shooting the free throw without being out there in the basketball court and shooting those free throw lines, right? That's the bottom line, is we need to find ways for our scholars to engage and experience what's being taught in the classroom in their into their day-to-day lives. All right, let's see. I think I have one more quote, and this kind of reflects upon what Dale's cone of understanding tells us from the beginning. And this is from Confucius. If you guys know Confucius, he lived a long time ago. And I think it's amazing that he, through this quote, showed us that he already had this almost this innate understanding of what was learned only 2,000 years later. So Confucius says, "I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand." And that's what I hope that you all take from this presentation today, that we want to get our scholars doing, whether it's doing on the computer, whether it's doing on pen and paper, but doing. And sometimes that doing is taking notes, engaging in those notes, engaging in your teacher, asking them those questions. And we'll see that the more they do, the more that they can engage, that higher that success and that achievement is going to be at the end. I think that's all I got for everybody. I think my last slide is just a list of the resources that I used to put together this presentation. Also, the Cornell Note template handout that I promised everybody. That's that fillable PDF. And I believe that Ms. Roberts will be sharing that with all our families in a separate slide. Thank you very much, and that's all I got.
Thank you so much, Mr. B. That was a lot of great information. So, learning coaches, there are just a couple ideas to be thinking about. There are various styles of notes that your scholar can use. They don't have to use them all. They don't have to use just one, but there are lots of different styles that you can choose from that Mr. B put together for us, and I'm sure there are even a ton more out there. So you do, though, need to choose what best fits your scholar's needs and their preferences or their tendencies. So be sure to keep that in mind, and you can, show them all to your scholar and give them the choice to choose and to try them out, and they can find what best fits them. So if there are also any other resources that we didn't recommend or that we didn't mention today that you have used and you think are great and you'd like to recommend those to our other fellow learning coaches or to our staff, please let me know. If we would love any tricks or tips that you also might have that we can share with your learning coach peers. You can post them to the comments of this video, or feel free to email them to info@compasscharters.org. And if you have any questions about this presentation or possibly have an idea of a topic that you would like to see presented, please give me a call. My number is 805-807-8215, or you can email me at kroberts@compasscharters.org, and I would be more than happy to help you. Also, there will be a link in the video description down there with those resources that you can submit your topic suggestion to as well. So thank you so very much. Compass Charters is just truly thankful to have you as a part of our Compass family. Thanks again for taking the time today to watch this recording. Thank you, Mr. B, for your time, for putting it together and presenting for us. We hope you do take a look at our YouTube channel, because there are many other resources available for our learning coaches there, and we are adding more. So please take a look there. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye.